Sarah was feeling defeated, and for good reason. She'd been let go from her job, rehired, and then let go again. She went through 7 rounds of interviews over 2 months for a job that she really wanted and didn't get. In her last interview, she was told that she didn't have, quote, executive presence. Okay, so when we had our coaching session, man, yeah, it's rough. I'm just going to be honest. If you are in this position where you are experiencing the whiplash, the highs and lows, the roller coaster of deeply wanting a job and not getting it, okay, we're going to take a deep breath together. I want us to look at the interview process like a boot camp. I know it's high stakes, but if you're going through lots of rounds of interviews like Sarah, I mean, that is a boot camp. Let's pretend that we don't want the job anymore. Instead, we are looking to learn as much as we can. We are looking to improve. And what are we improving? The way that we present ourselves, the way that we connect with another person. We want to be compelling. We want to show them how we think, how we problem solve, who we are, and why that brings value to their bottom line. If we can look at all of this as opportunities to learn and grow, it almost guarantees that we are going to get something out of the interview, even if we don't get the offer. But as you know, I'm not into toxic positivity or silver lining bullshit. For a lot of us, our bank accounts are on the line, and honestly, our self-esteem is on the line. We need real tactics to make tangible progress. For Sarah, in her coaching session, knowing that she was landing a fair number of interviews and getting pretty far in the process, I decided to really focus on strategies to give the company what they needed to hear while also authentically being herself, especially that executive presence comment that she got, which I have a lot of issues with it in general. But point being, if you're getting that feedback, instead of saying screw them, let's say, okay, what about being an executive presence? How do I define that first and foremost? And then how does that translate to what the company needs to see from me? And how can I be both strategic and authentic in how I present? At the day here, there's really only so much we can control. I think the entire job search process is a very meta exercise in finding that balance of taking command, pushing forward, and also letting go, which is very, very hard. As human beings, we are not wired to let things go. We are wired to problem solve, but there's only so much you can do. So that's why we're going to breathe again. I'm proud of Sarah for putting in the work. You're going to see her really grapple with the stuff that I throw at her. And honestly, guys, I want you to be proud of yourself too. I certainly am, because you're here, you're listening, and that counts. Let's dive in. You wrote in, I've been unemployed for a long while, and I'm struggling to get over the hurdle of interviewing and get an offer. You're making it halfway through, or in some cases even more. Do you have a sense of why you were rejected? But did you get any feedback on it? Did you feel like it went amazingly and then you were shocked? Give me some more details if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll use one that I would say just was the icing on my 2023. There was a role that I interviewed all the way through. I want to say it was like 6 or 7 rounds, 2 case rounds, probably spent about 2+ months recruiting for this role. They did give me feedback, which was helpful. And I was super appreciative of it. They weren't necessarily convinced that I had the executive presence or communication skills to present to executive leaders. I think I can understand why they gave that feedback. I will share that that presence is something that I am always working on. And it is one that I was very transparent with them, that it is something that it is what I call my quote unquote weakness, but it's something that I always work on, knowing that it's something that I just had the opportunity to continuously improve upon. And I think what ended up happening is that last round was with the VP, and we weren't vibing, where every other person I had chatted with, every other round, I left feeling good about it. And I think I was just fatigued because that round also came out of the blue. And listen, 6 rounds, case after case, and just you're burned out. And I think that it's not untrue. I did agree with it. It definitely was something that I have taken back and addressed as I'm interviewing or talking about my story or sharing even how I share that weakness story. So it's something that I appreciate. They really did like me. did say, hey, you're a good fit for this company, whatever, like we want to find you a spot. 7 months later, they haven't, but that's neither here nor there. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Are there other jobs that are similar to this one? And the reason I'm asking you that is, to me, this is such proof that you actually are on the right path, and A, will make some improvement with executive presence, and B, will make sure that it's the right fit for you too, right? Because it sounds like he wasn't the good fit for you.
Yeah.
Was this the kind of job that it's just one of a kind, there's nothing else out there, or are there other ones that you've been able to see? And if so, yay, because that shows that I think you can get it.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I really do appreciate that. It's not that it's one of a kind, but I will say it is singular in nature, meaning like if an organization has this role, there's one person who does it. And so they're few and far between. There are similar enough roles that I've talked to organizations about. So I do keep my eyes open for that, because it is the right fit. Very, very similar or aligned to my previous roles in the same industry. So
okay, good.
It's a good fit.
As long as it's not the only one of its kind. And because here's the feedback I was a little bit worried that they were going to give you is, you just don't have the right experience, which is solvable, but sometimes it means we have to get a little creative in how we solve it. In this case, boy, the feedback they gave you back is, again, I don't want to say it's easy to do, but you can learn that. Okay. That's not going to take you that much time and money and effort to resolve it. So that to me is the good news. Okay. Quick question about executive presence in how they define it and how you define it. I always have a little bit of a red flag, I gotta be honest, with that executive presence. It just feels sexist to me. We often define it as in very masculine terms, usually. And by masculine terms, extroverted. Like it has to be this bold, forward-facing, go get 'em style, versus something that's maybe a little bit more grounded and quiet and introspective. I think that could be a beautiful executive presence. However, it doesn't really matter, I think, how we define it. It matters how, unfortunately, they define it. And also, how executive are you feeling when you're desperate for work, right? So there's also a little bit of acting you'll have to do. You might not be feeling it, but you certainly have to project it. So there's this balance of you being you and authentically showing up, but also formulating it, aligning it to what the other person needs to hear. And it's that balance that is difficult and takes practice. Good news is, with all these interviews, you're getting a lot of practice. So first, in terms of how we feel about how that last one went, if we could really try to see it as just pretend that it was like a boot camp. It was a mock interview, because they put you through, to me, what sounds like a real boot camp here. These 6 interviews, the case studies, it's exhausting. You were burnt out. If we can pretend that it was not, quote, for real, like it wasn't actually a job that you were going to get, the universe already decided that, what it really was school. You just went to interview boot camp and you got your report card at the end and they were your instructor. Okay, I have the stamina to make it through to that point, at least. So you can feel really good about those things. Executive presence. So going back to how you define it versus how you think these other people have defined it that you're applying to. Talk to me about your response. What are you feeling? What are you thinking when you hear me saying these things?
Yeah, first of all, you're absolutely right. I think there's definitely a disparity between how I would define it and they would. But in the Venn diagram thing, there's definitely overlap, right? Like I think my guess is, so the person who was interviewing me was a male, and my guess is that he was looking for a more dominant or domineering personality, a little bit more forceful. And quite frankly, that is not, as you said, that's not my body language. I will never be that person. For me, executive presence is, are you able to be in a room with leaders, executives, and talk to them? Can you engage in a meaningful and productive conversation? And those are things that I've done. Truthfully, yes, if there is a leader, and I've had this experience, and again, this has always been my opportunity from the start of my career. But if there is a leader who is a bit more on that assertive or aggressive side, I may play small, and I may momentarily forget that I might be the subject matter expert of what I am talking about, but I will eventually assert my point of view. That is definitely something that I have also gotten much better at it. It's something I prepare for. Those are all things that I do to make sure that I am addressing what I know is my weakness. But I have also equally had, and quite frankly, more often than not, have really good and strong relationships with the executive leaders that I have partnered with.
Yeah.
They're just productive, and it may not be that male energy of a bull in a china shop, but it's definitely one in which I earn their trust. They believe in me and they take my point of view or my subject matter expertise as the right way to go, right? Like they rely on my expertise the
Mhm.
same way I would rely on them if I needed them in a capacity that was not my expertise.
I love this.
Yeah.
You've just said a bunch of things that are really helpful. You said that you have had productive relationships with executives. You've earned their trust. You've influenced. To me, that's what it,
Mm-hmm.
executive presence,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to influence, right? So it's the
Yep.
ability to be compelling. You've done that before, but you've also mentioned being thrown off, right? That there are times when you're like, oh, am I doubting myself, right? Let's think about the times where it's worked, where you have felt proud of yourself. What went into that? So, where you have demonstrated executive presence, you have earned the trust, even if it took time, we're going to try to figure out together how do you condense that? What are the elements needed to show that within the first 5 minutes of an interview? Because again, you've already proven this. You can
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
So, if you want to think in your mind, take a minute or take
Yeah.
however long you need just to reflect on a relationship or a few relationships you've had in the past or experiences where you were like, yeah, dang, Sarah, like that was the executive presence we're going for. What happened and what did you bring to the table? What made it so good? What made you bring that executive presence that we'd like to now conjure up in an interview?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
And by the way, I can jump in and just give you some starters here. As you're thinking about it, you might say, I was already really comfortable with them because I
Yeah.
knew them. Give me all the details of that because
Yeah.
we'll find clues within those details that we
Yeah.
can thread together and simulate, hopefully, in
Yeah.
an interview.
Yeah, I think there's part of that, right? Like, I'll give you one example. So when I first joined my previous employer, I was brand new, but when I went in to meet these leaders, I had a champion already, right? Like they had an established relationship with my manager. When she introduced me, I, for lack of a better term, like I was piggybacking on the trust that they had built with her and making them trust me because it's like, oh, you work for so and so, we like so and my guess is we're going to like you too. So there's that inherent or that kind of, there's a word for it and it's not coming to me, but essentially I was able to capitalize on the trust that she had built with them and made it my own. I'm trying to think what else. I think they were also just receptive, right? Like inherently, like I knew that they were interested in the transformative programs I was trying to implement. They were open and receptive to the operational change that I was proposing. And I think there was a realization that what I was going to offer them was at least going to try to get them onto a better path to help their business. And I think that open hearts, open minds mindset was, or that kind of body language and all of that really helped.
Okay. So that's perfect. And I'm going to rephrase my question just to put a little on the top here. So it's what do you need to feel in order to appear? We want you to feel like an executive in order to appear like an executive. So, what can we give ourselves so that we feel like the executive? You said that open hearts and open minds. Great. I love that. That is totally true. Only problem with it is it does rely on the other people.
Yeah.
And now I'm imagining the other people being assholes, right? Let's just say this VP. He was a jerk.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think he
yeah.
wanted to hire somebody who reminded him of himself. And
Mhm.
that's human nature, by the way. We bond with people who remind us of ourselves. So now you're in a situation where they are not making you feel like an executive. Uh-oh, now we're doubting ourselves. So we have to figure out those elements. How do we give them to ourselves? And some of this could be mindset shifts or reminders. So you tell me if this is resonating and put it into a real scenario with me, just using this example that you gave me of the VP, like going back, replaying how that could have gone. Is there any way that you could have made yourself feel more like an executive and then you would have presented yourself that way? We can also talk about some of the specifics you may have said or not said and what do you bring up? It's not just what you say, it's how you say it and also vice versa. But based off of that, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I have to remember, like when that job I was talking about, and I'll relate it back to the VP in the interview, but in that job, like I was new to the industry. I had no experience. And I came in and said that, right? I think if you're transparent with people and you say, hey, I may not be the expert here, but I am a quick learner.
Yep.
I want to understand your problems and I want to help address them. People are much more willing to be open or receptive to you if you are transparent and honest with them, right? I think I was able to say, like, just say that I'm a smart person, I'm going to be able to get this. And then also echoing back what they're saying in your own words. So
Mhm.
if they tell you what their business problem is, you repeat it back to them and rephrase that whatever statement or that problem statement that they said, so that it shows that you not only heard them, you listened and you digested what their problem is. And I think that actually, now as we're talking through this, that's actually what helped me earn their trust, be able to get into that comfortable place with them, and one that I quite frankly relied on for the rest of my time at that company. And
I find you so interesting because you have proven, because we're not outing you to everybody here, but like, I know where you've worked. I
yeah,
know you were let go and then rehired. So these things have nothing to do with you. It was all
mm-hmm.
industry specific, restructuring, etc. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you had some like confidence that was damaged in all of this. And I remember as the outsider looking at this thinking, interesting that she feels less confident. She's been rehired. Like that's a vote of confidence for
Yeah,
her. But I was basically watching you very much take personally, I think, things that were not personal at all,
yeah,
ultimately, right?
yeah,
Like market shifts. Now, all of a sudden, it's on you. I'm like, everything to do with some mismanagement at the top and I don't know, factory outsource. Like it was just so far away from actually you, your work ethic, how you approach problems. So there's obviously some stuff that continue to be worked on there in terms of protecting yourself and your sense of self
yeah,
from whatever other people are doing and saying. But to go back to executive presence, I love everything that you have defined more specifically here about how you present yourself and how you gain trust and how you then influence. What they're looking for is how you think, how you work, how you get things done. And they're just praying you're the one. And so I'm going to speak to just interviewing more in general here, dating. Every time you're going out on a date, unless you're just going to have fun, which is totally fine, chances are you're hoping you want to marry this person, right? Like you're in it for the long term. Everybody who walks in the door on an interview, from the first interview to especially the end interview, they're like, please be our person. And not only that, can you please solve our problems yesterday? Like, their chances are the person who's interviewing you came from a meeting where they were told that things were a shit show and every
mm-hmm.
company is having problems. We all have issues, fires needing to be put out all the time. And so when you come in and are able to articulate back to them that you were listening, they feel heard. And you communicating, all right, this is the problem and the challenges as I've understood it. Here's how I would solve it. Here are examples from the past that I've done that give me confidence that this would be a way to approach it. But what do you think? So repeating back to them what you've understood, examples from your past, but not just being like, and thank you very much, but how can that then transition to them giving you more information about their problems? If we could all challenge ourselves to turn interviews into really interesting problem solving conversations, that
Yeah,
would be fantastic. Let's even imagine that it's not an interview anymore. It's actually the first day. They've already hired you. They already said, we want you, because this is true. They wouldn't be wasting their time bringing you in, especially if you're at the place where you've done 6 interviews. My God, they're spending money on you at this point because time is money. And if we can just pretend this is a strategy session and it's all about solving their problems, and even for yourself, you have a sense of what their problems are so far, but could they even tell you more? Right? Where are things broken? Where can things be optimized? So it's not just about the department's challenge, but it might even be about how the department's communicating with each other that's then leading to the challenge not being solved as optimally as it could. Learnings that you've had as you've gone through your own experiences that could be applied to their challenges. And so I would love is when everybody walks away from this interaction they have with you, if they're like, oh my gosh, not only can Sarah solve the challenge that we thought we were going to hire her for, but she's actually coming in with ideas for how to make so many more things better. Now, of course, we want to be careful and not have you sign up for a larger scope than you're being paid for. But if you are all about the problem solving, amazing. And by the way, problems for businesses always come down to money, which can be measured in, of course, dollars, but also in time. So if you have come in and you've really thought creatively about solving problems with time and money, and you'll have examples from your past, that's executive presence, because that's what executives are thinking about. Another way to think about money and time and how you can solve these problems is imagining if you had to go before a board of advisors and defend your position. Why should they continue to pay you? You're solving problems, right? This is exciting. Everybody wants to hear that you can come in and solve their problems, right?
Yeah.
And so a challenge for us, a good challenge would be every time that you answer a question, is there a way that you can then prompt them to give you more information? Almost like you're a business therapist now,
Yeah.
and they're just telling you everything and anything. Okay. And if they can talk a lot, A, they'll feel good because everybody likes to hear themselves. B, you're getting more specific information that you can now give specific responses on. And it feels a little bit more of a back and forth that's organic as opposed to this one way they interview you and that's the end of it. So, based off of all of that, tell me if this is what you're already doing, if it sparked anything new. And in reflecting on this last opportunity, this VP, if there's anything that could have been done differently based off of what I've just shared.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I really loved what you just said about engaging in a dialogue. How you kick this off by saying, think of it as like the first day of work. If you can engage in that kind of dialogue, you're basically giving them like a window into what it would be like for you guys to work together. I really like that. I am much better in a back and forth. The like question and answer thing is it's not natural for anybody. And it's not natural for people who are also not good actors, which I would say I am not. But I actually have had that happen. And it's something that I have tried to address in my interview responses. Yes, I know everybody uses the CAR or the STAR framework. Essentially, you're answering the question and then saying, and this is how I think it's relevant to your company or your organization and how I would do something similar for you. You basically need the interviewer to take the bait in that situation. And I've actually had people do that. It's interesting. One of the other roles that I interviewed for it a month or so ago, but the hiring manager and I, we had a great, like a good connection. We had a really good dialogue, just talking about problems back and forth. Unfortunately, they went a different direction, but I know that he really liked the way that I thought. And I was answering questions in a way that was addressing whatever need he had in the moment. And so we were having this working session in a sense. When he literally said in the interview, I love the way you think.
Yes, because no one is you.
Yeah.
And that's where then you don't have to compete with people based off of experience. In case it's not the exact experience they're looking for, you can get an edge because the way that you come in and your brain, again, is unique to you. Effectively, what we're doing here is pretending that we have the job and this is a strategy session to figure out how they can best leverage your strengths to solve their challenges. So it also means you have to come in with a real command of what are my strengths here and what are the examples that I'm going to be showing them, weaving in as organically as possible in what hopefully feels more like a conversation. And so I think this also speaks to, and I hate this word, but I haven't been able to come up with a new phrase, like personal brand. So in the way I'm defining it is, what is your method, process, ethos when somebody works with you? Okay. So when you can nail that, that translates into executive presence. Then, of course, there's things you'll do like open body language, making sure your voice doesn't go up at the end of a sentence, not saying those things can be trained out of you, but the foundation has to come from what your actual strengths are that you want to highlight here. And they can be some skills, of course, but I think it's actually a little bit more of your brain, the strengths of your brain. What aspects of how you think and operate do they need to know about you? Another way to imagine it is if somebody, and because this is going to happen, by the way, once they leave the interview, they're going to tell another person how it went. And I want you to make it easy as possible for them to say exactly what you want them to say about you.
Yep.
Sarah was XYZ. So even just picking 3 things right now Do you have a sense of what your, again, ethos, methodology, process, your brain, what is the strength of working with Sarah might be?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that absolutely makes sense. I think for me, the values that I think this is essentially saying what are the values that you lean in hard to. And I think for me, that's being a good listener, being empathetic, not at all. And then I'm curious. I think that's really important. I think that is, if you don't ask questions, you're not going to be able to solve problems because you're not going to know what the problems are.
Okay. And the next question here, though, taking these three things. So good listener, empathetic, curious. Why do all of these matter when it comes to the business bottom line? So in other words, how do they impact money made and saved? Of course, you'll think of examples that are very specific to the job that you're applying to, but for our purposes right here, just generally, do you have a sense of how you might respond?
Yeah, I think the question is like, what are the key business areas or the key business opportunities where we need to find answers or find solutions? And my curiosity is going to help me understand what those problems are. Curiosity and my ability to listen are going to help me address those things. And with those two values in particular, if I can take what I hear and translate that into a solution, then I can help you build your business or fix your business with whatever work or solutioning I offer in my particular role.
Great. Do you have concrete examples for those? You don't have to give me the
Yes.
exact one. Okay.
Yes, I
This
do.
is so important. So everybody listening, if you heard my podcast or watched it with B, I talked to her about this. You got to show, not tell. And far too many of us are simply saying, I'm a good listener, and here's why it's important. Sure, anyone can say that, but if you're giving me an actual example told in a compelling way, and we can talk about what compelling means in a second, then I'll remember it. First of all, I'm more likely to remember it. And second of all, only you can tell that story versus anyone simply stating, I'm a good listener and here's why it's important, right? So it's just really critical for everybody that when you bring up anything about yourself, you need to back it up with an example, and probably would behoove everyone to practice. How do you do that organically? So even little filler words, little transition words like, yeah, it really reminds me of a time when, or I've seen why that's so important in a business because, or I actually learned this the hard way, and tell a funny story.
Yeah.
We all hear the advice that I'm giving and it all makes sense, but then we have a hard time doing it. And I have a hunch it's because we haven't practiced an organic way to integrate it into the back and forth, which is also why it's so important to practice interviewing. And that's something you've had a lot of practice with when the stakes are high. I'm curious, have you done interview practice when the stakes are low?
I think you're right. I think I do my prep work once I have something in the works, but quite frankly, it's been a few weeks since I've done my interview practicing or prep work. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying, and I think this is true for me, I'm having this aha moment. She was like, my stories were starting to sound stale because she was telling them over and over again in a way that was maybe inorganic, maybe just she was probably fatigued, right? Like we're all burned out, and she had been unemployed, I think, for six months. God, I wish at 6 months I was not so burned out. I am burned out now, but I really her that messaging really resonated with me. So I think yes, I'm prepping, but am I prepping too much in a way that just sounds rehearsed and not necessarily I heard you and hey, that reminds me of this in a way that becomes conversational. Because I think if I were to like give this very pithy one-liner about what you're saying, it's essentially can you interview in a way that is just conversational?
Yeah.
I'm not reducing what you're saying because I think everything you're saying is absolutely spot on. But if I were to just have a one-line headliner, that is how do you turn an interview into a conversation?
Yeah. Think of it like improv a little bit, or people who are fantastic actors. It's because they're being utterly real in the moment. But they have to perform that play. If we're talking about stage actors, they're performing that play every day for weeks and sometimes twice a day if they're doing a matinee. But it feels fresh every time. It feels fresh to the audience because if they're a great actor, it feels fresh to them. I see preparing for interviews similarly to that. And also very similarly to even what I'm doing with you here today, or when I give talks, like I have a series of workshops that I give all the time.
Yep.
And I'm saying the same thing all the time. And I'm telling the same stories all the time. Of course, that gets monotonous sometimes, but usually it doesn't actually. And that's often because I'm coming in looking at a few different things. Number one, I'm challenging myself. Can I be as present as possible? And if you're an active listener, which you've said you are, that actually means you're very good at being present. So if we are constantly in the moment together, it's a little bit harder to feel on Zoom, obviously, than in person, but there is an energy exchange that's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is not happening at any other point in your life and time. Like when you met with that VP, that was a special moment in time for both of you. You were both committed to it. Chances are we were all thinking about different things. We were in our heads about how nervous we were, or we were getting weird vibes from him. And maybe actually that had nothing to do with you. It's because his ass was handed to him from his boss, or he was hungry, or whatever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to do our best to just corral ourselves to be in the moment. Please, if you don't already have a practice for being present, start that now because it's going to be way too hard to tap into that in that moment during those high ass stakes if you don't already have the muscle a little bit developed. So being present will always make this fresh. Okay. Second of all, you're going to look at this as a little bit of a game. It's a game of capitalism. We all have to play it, whether we like it or not. You're going to be going in with, okay, I have a bunch of things that I'm practicing here in this game of capitalism. And that is based off of the research I did for this company and everything that I've picked up from them for all my previous interviews, if you've had them. Here's how I'm going to need to tailor myself, that Venn diagram. How do I do that? We think that the executive presence that they're going to require of you is going to look like A, B, and C. Part of this is, can I do that? I'm challenging myself and simultaneously coming in and being the way I want to be. That takes a lot of brain power. That's like a lot of energy. That's why we're all burnt out. The reason I think we're not getting enjoyment from that energy is because we're resisting it. We're saying, I don't like this. I just want a job. All of those things are true, and I don't want to deny that. We've got to find a way to celebrate this somehow. Otherwise, we're just going to live in the shit. And that's our lives. I don't want you to look back at the past X number of months or years you've been unemployed and go, it's been a wash. This is a dark time and a blip on the radar, and I wish it never happened. No, this is your life. We've got to find ways that you are just constantly growing out of this.
Yeah.
Constantly discovering and uncovering new things about yourself. And I have to say, for anyone who's uncovering new things about yourself, oftentimes that comes through pain. That's, I don't like this about myself or the situation, therefore I need to make change. There's a lot of suffering that's happening in that process. So when I say joy or rejoice, it doesn't necessarily, quote, feel good, okay? But you are making momentum. You are self-generating energy here. That is very hard to do when we are wholly reliant on, I need this job or I need this thing from this other person. It's both. We do need that job. We do need those people. And we've got to figure out how to give this to ourselves. So what's our progress report here on interviewing and executive presence? How do we make sure that we are improving according to ourselves, regardless of if we get the job? Because there are so many things outside of our control here.
Yep.
Or people saying to you, I loved you, and we went in a different direction. So in terms of, I think also getting excited to tell the stories in a fresh way, sometimes we need to play around with it, means telling it maybe in a little bit of a different way, or it's just as simple as loving what you did. Didn't mean you had to love the job or love your role or the outcome. There might have been a lot of bullshit that had to do with it, but try to find an element of it or a thing at its core that you are very proud to talk about, which you've shared it with me, right? Like we started our conversation today with like ways in which maybe you were deficient as bringing an executive presence. And then we pivoted to, hold on now, we've definitely demonstrated executive presence in these other circumstances, those elements. So same thing goes with the stories that we tell. There are elements we can get excited about because they're tapped into purpose or they're related to the good listener, empathetic, curious, right? The values, the strengths. If we're not excited to talk about it, it's probably not the right story to tell ultimately.
Yep.
So again, there's a sort of a balance and a nuance to everything I'm saying here, but I think it's sparking some stuff. Tell me if it feels too abstract, or what are your thoughts off of all of that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think being present makes a lot of sense. I think when you're talking about being excited to share those stories, I think you're totally right. I think I've even in my interview prep, I have heard from people when I tell the stories that excite me the most or the projects that really excite me, it shows up. It shows up in my body language. It shows up in my face. I am also a very animated and a person who uses her hands a lot to talk,
Yeah.
and it shows up. So that totally makes sense. I think you're right. I think using each interview, of course, yes, I'm 100%. You're right. I think I am absolutely. I will say that sometimes when I go into an interview, especially the roles where I'm like a 3 in excitement, I'm just like, you know what? This is not exactly what I want to do. Shit, I need a job. I'm okay with that. I probably don't show up with the right energy, but I do think that through the interview process, I have discovered things about myself, my storytelling, the things that I do love or don't love about the work I've done or the work I want to do. So, yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's so critical to take those findings and apply them not only to the next job you have, but quite frankly, to the next interview you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. And for something that you're not particularly excited about, it just simply means the challenge is greater for you to be creative about how to
Yeah,
get excited about it.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm not talking about being excited to get the job, because again, that relies on them to say yes, but being excited to have the interaction, to have the
yeah,
experience of this interview. You know what we can get excited about? The fact that you're there, they're hoping you're the one, right? So be
yeah,
the one for them.
yeah,
These are real people that you're interviewing with. This is a networking experience. You're going to make them walk away from that interaction with you and go, wow, I am so glad I connected with Sarah. That's a good person to know. She came in with some creative ideas, good energy.
yeah.
I loved her thoughtful questions back to me. So not just the responses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let this be an opportunity to inspire the other person. So taking
Yeah,
away the pressure of must have job, but just us in this moment together, what impression am I leaving them with? And that's up to you, actually. No, it isn't. It's how they perceive you, and you don't have control over that, of course. But if you are coming in being very deliberate with these are the 3 things about myself, my strengths that I need them to know about me, because it's going to help them solve their challenges. How can I demonstrate that in the stories I tell, the way I tell those stories, my body language, and everything in between? And so, whatever happens after that, you can be proud that you presented yourself the way that you wanted.
yeah,
Anyone who does that can get excited about it. Okay.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
when we're ceding control or focusing on things that we don't have command over that it's, I hope it goes well. No, you can make sure it goes well because you
yeah,
presented yourself in a thoughtful way. And that to me just requires practice, which you were
yeah,
certainly getting enough of. However, both for you and for everybody listening, let's make sure we're also practicing when the stakes aren't so high. So you went through those 6 rounds and I called it a boot camp, right? Because it really
mm-hmm.
was, especially with the pressure. But I think it would behoove you, everybody listening, to find somebody. And I would encourage everyone, reach out to me. I want to start putting together cohorts of people working on this stuff of serious butt kicking practicing, saying in an interview, here are my 5 questions that I tend to get tripped up on, or here, the thing I'm struggling with is executive presence. I'm going to define it for this person in these ways. When we have this mock interview, I'd like them to rank me or give me feedback on my executive presence very specifically.
Yep.
And so I know this sounds very formulaic. It should. However, when you go in to have this experience, that's when the improv happens. You're totally in the moment and you're going to see what happens. And then you're going to hope that they throw curveballs at you because then it'll keep it interesting. Just like when I go into these coaching sessions, not just ones that I'm doing for the podcast, but in general, of course, I'm sharing similar things with people. So I'm praying, make it hard for me, make me better at my job. So
Yeah,
that's where I would constantly was stopping. How do you feel? What do you think? What's resonating? What's not? Where do you need more clarification? Because I want to be a better coach out of our interaction, right?
yeah, yeah,
So same thing here when you're practicing. You want these things to be challenging for you so that you can improve. What would be so awesome is if out of this entire interview job search experience, you said, wow, what I gained was an impenetrable self-esteem and executive presence.
yeah,
And I developed that not through having a job, but through not having a job.
yeah.
So this is the universe's lesson for you, or the blueprint for the lesson. You're now going to design what the curriculum for the lesson looks like. And you've gotten enough data based off of your applying, the interview process, feedback, and not feedback, right? And how you intuitively feel about this. So really design for yourself, how can you make every single interview from now on be something that you are incredibly proud of, no matter how it goes on their end and how they respond to you. And then set up ways for you to write it out, practice it with yourself, and practice it with a partner. And then you're going to get so jazzed about these interviews. You're going to come in with a totally different energy. And then you're probably going to get an offer for a job you don't even fucking want because it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last thing I want to mention before I let you go is I think a lot of us who are not landing the job that we want, we lose confidence for obvious reasons. But one of those reasons might actually be because you're simply not working, right? You're missing the thing that you enjoy and that you're good at. So is there a way that you can give that to yourself? So without waiting for someone else to give you the job, are there at least elements of the job? And this, of course, will be very specific to whatever it is that you're applying, your actual job. But are there elements that you can integrate into your life now so that you are at least not getting rusty at it, right? Not losing your confidence that you can, in fact, do this job. The reason I bring this up is partly because you had mentioned that times in which you've demonstrated executive presence, they were in the past and they were based on relationships. And then there was an element of time, right? And work. This person had exposure to you, saw you working, right? In this case with interviews, right? They haven't really seen you work. I want you to mimic that for yourself, see yourself work now, and then you'll be fresher, right? When you go into these interviews, it's not going to feel like such a leap. You're not going to be making these things up. You're giving yourself the job now that you want. That can be hard to do for some people based off of the sort of work and industry that they're in. So I'm curious for you, of course, if that resonates, but B, like concretely, is there a way you can do that for yourself?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I did give a slightly, to use my friend's term, stale example, but you're right. I think for me personally right now, I was volunteering with an organization. I now have been consulting with them, most like it converted in from volunteer to consulting. But yes, it is absolutely forcing me to, or not forcing me, it's giving me the opportunity to flex my strategic thinking, flex my process development, those types of thinking or that type of thinking. I'm also engaging with the executive team, their advisory board. So it's a lot of that executive presence that we're talking about. I think while I was talking to my friend about this, and to what I would say put a neat bow on this is like there are examples there of my executive presence that I have that are much more recent that I should be incorporating into my interview story kind of playbook, right? And that is something that I have taken some time to at least like just rough sketch out. I need to workshop them, obviously, so that they're more interview facing, I would say. But yes, so yes, that I'm definitely trying to make sure I'm not totally going stale.
Yeah. And I know you don't want to be an entrepreneur, but I think everybody should think like one.
Yeah.
And you might as well, and not just for you, for anybody listening, go pitch a startup, go pitch somebody who, and maybe you don't need to because you already are doing this in a volunteer capacity, a company that's new, that needs help, and you can offer some services and maybe get paid a little bit of money or not, or there could be an affiliate agreement as they get say customers, maybe you're taking a percentage or get creative in the way that you think about compensation.
Yeah.
Just something that keeps that muscle of work exercising. Because right now there's a lot of self work, which is excellent. That's actually why I love the job search process because it forces you, or as you said, in a much better way, invites you to really learn so many things about how you are in this world, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with time management, quite frankly, right in the job search, so you don't get burnt out. Great, but we also still have to exercise our work muscles, and doing that will give us confidence and the executive presence we seek. So there's no reason why we all can't pitch a brand that we think we could help. This is all based off of solving people's problems, solving their challenges, and you might get a client out of it, which I'm so glad to hear that you actually have. So maybe despite your own idea of yourself, turns out maybe you might get some clients here. You are a consultant, you are an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and then you are your own safety net. which is scary, but it's also in a way more assuring once you have those practices of any setback is fodder for growth. And that includes getting this far in an interview and being told no because of executive presence. Brutal. I didn't acknowledge that's awful. But again, I just see it as the jumping off point for self growth. And so as long as we can make sure we've got support systems around us reminding us of that, because a lot of things I shared here today, they're helpful in theory, but in practice, that's the suffering can get in the front of it. So making sure we've created environments around us that help us continue to do the work. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it was relatable to so many people. I hope I was able to give some counsel that was both kind of theoretical, but also practical. Will you keep me and everyone posted?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this was, yes, it was very helpful. I think it's
Okay.
it definitely resonated. And I so appreciate you sharing and giving your thoughts. And I think you articulated some of the things that I've been feeling or thinking or am thinking rather. And so I so appreciate that. And I will absolutely keep you posted.